Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me. I am the Fuzz, and today we're going to talk about stats on cards. Now, this video is titled Library Guards, Why Is It So Good? That's because the Library Guards, I feel like, is the kind of the most obvious example of what's going on. So, what are we going to talk about? Library Guards is a good card, right? Yeah, we all know that. It's been running a lot of decks. But when you start thinking about exactly why it's so good, now the obvious answer might be, well, it has good stats and, you know, it draws a card. Right, but what is it about the stats that makes it good? If you look at another card, like Zombie Giant, oh my god, it's a 4/5. It has huge stats, right? It's slower, and yet it sees almost no play. So what's going on here? Why is one of them played in almost everything and the other is not played at all? Now, what we're going to cover essentially is why certain stat lines are better than others, and you know what kind of a cost a card wants to have. Because if you look at Library Guards, right, it's a 4-drop, and by that we mean that it can be played on turn 4 at the earliest, assuming you're not ramping. Let's say this guy is also a 4-drop, right? You can play it at the earliest at turn 4. So you'd think, okay, well, they both cost the same. Or do they? Well, it turns out that one of them is much cheaper than the other, and we're going to talk about exactly that. So, when it comes to costing mana in Spellweaver, we're not just dealing with mana, we're dealing with mana and aspect, and that's actually a very big deal. So, Library Guards is a 4-drop, Griffin Rider is a 4-drop, but Griffin Rider is only a 4-drop if A, you start with Order, and B, you don't go up aspect. You go, you know, one aspect, mana, and then you play Griffin Rider. And that's the only way it's a 4-drop. If you go up a second aspect at any time, it's no longer a 4-drop. It's more like a 5-drop. Whereas Library Guards, and for that matter, Bloodseeking and Harpy, the two other really popular cards, are 4-drops that can be played on turn 4 in any color, as long as you're running, you know, Corruption in the case of Harpy, or Wisdom in the case of Library Guards. And you can reach this cost in several ways. You can go up, you know, 1 aspect 1 mana, then 1 aspect 2 mana, 2 aspect 2 mana, 2 aspect 3 mana. Or you can get to 3 mana first and then get your second aspect. So you basically have a lot of ways to play this guy on turn 4. Whereas the other guys, the Griffin Rider, the Gigantodon, the Zombie Giant, can only be played in 1 aspect if you do not go up any other aspects. So that's a problem, because that makes the comparisons very unfavorable for these cards. If you think of it this way, it's almost like it might as well cost 2 aspects, right? Because going up a second aspect before 4 mana is pretty common, because a lot of really good cards are 2 aspects that you want to play anyways. And yeah, because of that, cards like Zombie Giant wouldn't get played until turn 5. So it's a 5-drop actually in a lot of ways, almost. So it's actually more expensive than, say, a Library Guards, and that's why the comparison is so bad here. You know, among other things we'll discuss. Like, the closest is, you look at Griffin Rider, you look at Library Guards. Like, they got the same stats and the same speed. Library Guards draws you a card. Griffin Rider is flying and ranged. Right? Okay, so is flying and ranged so much worse than drawing a card that you never see this guy anywhere? No. Is it better, worse? Drawing a card is probably a little bit better overall, but flying and range is a good combo too. But we never see Griffin Rider anywhere because it's not really a 4-drop. It's more like a 5-drop. And because of that, it's really competing at a different level. It feels like it costs more, because it kind of does, but it doesn't have more power to it to compensate. So cards like this, the 1 mana 4 aspect, basically suck ass. It's a really bad cost to be at, and that's not the only thing. There's 2 more reasons why this mana cost is so bad. Number 2, Harpy. Harpy kills them. That's really bad. If you play a Zombie Giant and they play a Harpy and it dies, well, you're pretty wrecked. So that's a problem. And it makes playing big one aspect cards really unappealing because of the threat of Harpy. Now, it's not like Harpy's in every deck, but if your opponent is playing Corruption, there's a pretty high chance you will see a Harpy. And you don't want these matchups to just be completely bad for you, where your big creatures get killed for free. So yeah, 4 mana, 1 aspect is bad. But there is yet another reason why this is bad. And it has to do with the card New Horizons that searches out an additional aspect for you. If you play New Horizons on turn 2, then you can play a Library Guards on turn 3. You cannot play a New Horizons on turn 2 and play a Griffin Rider on turn 3. That's a problem, because any deck that runs Horizons likes to run cards like Library Guards, Harpy, and Mutant, because they can immediately play them and usually catch up on the board after kind of skipping turn 2. Library Guards gives you that card back and is a decent body on the board, and Harpy and Mutant, kill off aggro. But poor old Griffin Rider and his 4 mana buddies don't have that flexibility. So that actually is such a big deal. I want you to imagine this scenario. Imagine for a second that this card costs 3 mana, 2 aspects. If I was reviewing Griffin Rider at 2 aspects, 3 mana, I think it's alright. It's got good, good stats. Got flying in range. That's a nice combo. It's a knight. It might have some potential. At 4 mana, 1 aspect, it's basically trash. Now let's look at Library Guards. What if Library Guards cost 4 mana and 1 aspect instead? Would it actually be that good? Well, if I'm going to imagine that I'm reviewing that card, 4 mana, 1 aspect, draw a card, I would think, I guess it's alright. It's a bit expensive. It might be okay for Mono Wisdom decks, because they could actually play it on curve, but any other deck might probably just take a pass. It's just too slow. You can't wait that long for a card that only barely stabilizes the board. Library Guards might not be unplayable, but it would be way worse. And let's not even talk about Harpy, which would die to its own effect, but that's beside the point. Basically, what we have just learned is that difference in cost, 4 mana and 1 aspect versus 3 mana, 2 aspects, makes a card worse. Quite a bit worse. And the cards that have that cost just don't have anything to offer. Zombie Giant and Gigantodon are big bodies, okay, but that's it. And they feel like 5-drops, unless you're specifically going 1 aspect, but because of the existence of Harpy, that's a bad idea. So we've covered the aspects. Let's get back to our friend Library Guards. We've established why 2 aspect, 3 mana is good. Well, actually, before we continue, there's one other way to be a 4-drop in this game, and that's the 3 aspect, 2 mana. Well, technically, you could say there's also the 4 aspect, 1 mana, but no such card exists, and I don't think we will ever get something like that. So anyways, a card like Necromantic Cult, 3 aspect, 2 mana, right? It's also a 4-drop. And actually, Necromantic Cult is quite powerful. Now, currently, we only have 2 cards with this cost. Necromantic Cult and Namir. We just have a few more. So, Namir and Necromantic Cult are both very powerful cards. So, why aren't they, played everywhere? Well, there's 2 reasons. Number 1, they both cost 2 aspects of their respective type. And that means you can't just splash them. They have to be the core of your deck. But more importantly, these 2 cards just happen to be not good on curve. You don't want to just play this on turn 4. It's not bad, but you usually want to save it for a ridiculous combo where you clear the board. And Namir's actually alright on curve, but most of the time you're gonna want that 1 extra mana to immediately put his ability to use. Oh, actually, there is one other card that I forgot about. We'll bring up real fast. That is also a 3 aspect 2 mana, and that's the Bloodwell Matriarch. But it's essentially the same story. This is not very effective on curve, unless your opponent actually has a lot of spells in the graveyard. But much like the other guys, this is the kind of card you save for a little later and make a big play. Now, the other reason why this is a little worse than the 2 aspect cost is because going up a 3rd aspect requires a further investment. You're staying at 2 mana if you were to do that, and you're losing another card. And again, this card just immediately isn't going to make an impact big enough to recover. So overall, cards like this, they tend to be better once you have like 3 aspects and 4 mana. That's when you can do some combo wombo. Whereas the guys like the library guards and stuff, they're just better. They're just great on curve most of the time. I mean, library guards is always good on curve. Harpy is never bad on curve, and Mutant is usually almost always good on curve. They're not combo cards, whereas the other guys are combo cards. But 3 aspects, 2 mana is kind of slower because of the added investment. But those cards, Namir and Cult, are more powerful, and it shows. You know, Namir is a 3/3 with 3 speed that can immediately buff something else by a lot, and Cult has been known to clear boards in his spare time. So makes sense, right? What about this? This doesn't carry any impact. We're not even gonna get to the stats yet, but this just doesn't carry nearly the same kind of an impact. Anyways, enough about the levels. Let's get to those stats. So good old library guards, 2/3 with 3 speed. Well, it turns out in the game of Spellweaver, 2/3 with 3 speed is really good. But why is it really good? Well, number one, 3 speed kind of puts you in like a first class category. 4 speed is really rare. There's like maybe 3 creatures that have it, so that's very rare. It's basically equivalent to unblockable. 3 speed, however, puts you in like the good category where you can engage with most creatures, and it's just really good to have, especially since Lamp of Zafir is now no longer 3 speed. Most decks won't have that much 3 speed stuff, except maybe like elves or something. So being at 3 speed means this guy can hold down the board pretty well because he's hard to attack, and he can attack whatever he wants. So 3 speed is always a plus. And now that 2/3 stat line. Now in some games like Hearthstone, 2/3 and 3/2 are considered about equal. In Spellweaver, not so much. 3/2 is mostly garbage. Well, it's not that much better than 2/2. And 2/3 is really good. How do I mean? You remember Haldiri Rider? Let's pull him up real quick. This little guy, he used to be a 3/3. He went to 3/2, which made him super, super worse. Not horribly useless, but way worse. Whereas a library guard at 2/3 is actually pretty decent. So, why? This is very simply because 2 attack is the most common attack value in Spellweaver by a large margin. A whole lot of things have 2 attack. Don't believe me? Let's take a gander, shall we? 2 attack, 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 2 attack. That's like most of the creatures. You know, a few have 1, and like the angels have more. Wisdom is kind of weird because a lot of their creatures are just kind of awkward, but okay. 2 attack, 2 attack, 2 attack, 2 attack. That's a support creature. 2 attack, that's 3 attack. And even this is 2 attack. So like, again, most of the creatures are 2 attack. Let's go into Rage. 2 attack. Kind of 2 attack. Well, when he attacks, it's 2 attack. 2 attack. 2 creatures with 2 attack. 2 attack. Usually 2 attack. 2 attack. Oh, this is a 3/2. Oh, wow. Totally see this guy everywhere. So, yeah. 2 attack is such a common value that having 3 health means you don't die blocking any of these creatures. Whereas this guy, having only 2 health, dies blocking or attacking every single one of those creatures. And that really sucks for him. That's why this guy is basically absolute trash in the game. The only reason this card sees any place is because it's a shaman and, you know, the shaman synergy and all that. But 3/2 sucks compared to 2/3 because 2/3 can block and often kill a lot of things, or 3/2 can't kill anything because 1 attack creatures suck ass in Spellweaver unless they're like utility creatures, but you don't seriously use those for any real combat except maybe Fia or something. So this is where we get to the heart of the matter, basically, where we got the perfect stat line 2/3 with the good speed with the right cost, and well, you know, drawing a card is just kind of nice, right? it's pretty good. Or whatever other good effect. So, now, we said how 3 speed is really good. You know what's really bad? 1 speed. Let's look at this guy. Zombie Giant, right? So, in Spellweaver, 4-5 is a colossal stat line. Really, really big. Kills most anything. Right? We saw 2-3 is pretty good. 3-3 can kill the 2-3s, right? And everything else. And like anything bigger than 3-3 is very uncommon. So 4-5, man, surely stats this big are enough to make up for this horrible cost. And the stats are good, but 1 speed is actually, just as 3 speed is a great benefit, 1 speed is absolutely horrible because it means you basically cannot attack anything. And anybody can attack you. And 4-5 may seem fearsome, but because of how damage works in Spellweaver, if your opponent has a 2-2 and a 3-3, and he runs them both in to the Zombie Giant, only the 2-2 dies and the 3-3 lives with 1 health, and then it heals at the end of turn. That kind of sucks. That means the Giant doesn't actually do that much on the board. If you play it to try to catch up on the board, A, your opponent might just completely ignore it and keep going face. B, they'll just trade off 1 2-drop for it. And that really blows. Poor old Zombie Giant. I like big creatures in Spellweaver, but unfortunately most of them just kind of suck. There's only one exception to this rule. One creature that's big and, like, actually decent. And that's the Bedeviled Fiend. It's one of my favorite creatures in the game, even though it has no text. But it's got 5 attack. That's a big deal. It's a 5-3. It has the right stats. You know, if this card costs 4 mana 1 aspect, it would be trash, basically, just like all the other ones. But, no, it has a good cost. You can play it off of Horizons. It works with Kayanu. And 5 attack is no fucking joke, dude. It's a quarter of your HP. It's got 3 health, so it doesn't die too easily. It's actually just a really good beat stick. If you're looking for a beat stick, you will take this card over Zombie Giant any day. One nice thing about him is that unlike the Zombie Giant, it's harder to actually trade him off with garbage because 5 attack is a big deal. Not to mention 2 speed means he can actually participate in combat and pick off creatures he doesn't like. And, well, he's got 5 attack. So, yeah. I kind of hope we had more creatures like this that don't have 1 speed. 1 speed means you either have to have a ridiculously good effect or you'd have to have, like, colossal stats. The closest 1 speed creature that might see play is the Dread Knight, but it's a 6/6, which is completely massive, and it's deadly, so there is no trading with this guy. Everything that attacks him will be killed. And he even has an immediate impact on the board. And even Dread Knight doesn't really see much play. That's how high the expectations are for 1 speed. And that's why you've got a crappy little 2-3 library guards being played where a 6/6 isn't. Isn't that something? It's one of those things in Spellweaver that makes balancing somewhat difficult because just adding or removing 1 stat at those early stages, like going from 2-2 to 2-3 is just incredible. Whereas going from like 5/6 to 6/6 is mostly meaningless. In any case, I do hope we get more bigger creatures, even if they have no effects, just more beat sticks to work with. Because right now, I think the game is oversaturated with like 2-2s and 2-3s. Way too many of those guys. We need more big stuff. Or like rebalance some stuff. So that's it. That's the end of the discussion. I think when we look at future cards that are released, we will have to consider the aspect to mana corresponding ratio in a much higher detail because it has a much bigger impact than we realize. 4 mana 1 aspect is automatically trash unless it's absolutely ridiculous. And I actually would like to see something like that because it's a very committing card. Going 4 mana on 1 aspect is very strict. And if the card is good enough, great. But otherwise, no chance. And yeah, any card that's 2 aspect 3 mana is automatically worth looking at because it's sitting at that sweet spot where it comes right after Horizons. It can come out of Kayanu and it can be splashed very easily. And it's for those reasons, more than even his stats or effect, that Library Guards is so good. I mean, of course, all those things matter, but it is the mix of all the good all the goodies. The good mana cost, the good speed, the decent body, and a good effect. Makes for a really, really, really solid creature that rightfully is in basically any deck that can play it, and will continue to be so, along with his best friends, Harpy, because her anti-aggro capabilities are ridiculous, and Mutant for basically the same reason. And I think if any of these cards were 4 mana, 1 aspect, they would be close to unplayable. But if they were 3 aspect, 2 mana, that'd be a bit interesting. I think Mutant is the best candidate for something like that, because Mutant is the card with the potential to grow and be a ever increasing threat. That might be interesting. Although instilling blood-seeking mutants would be pretty retarded. So maybe if they make him 3 aspect, 3 mana, but in that case he would need a stat boost. But I'd be okay with that, because if he's 3 aspect, 3 mana, then you can't just put him out that early. You know, you have to wait another turn. You have to go up an extra aspect. That might be cool. But that's a topic for another day. Anyways, thank you for watching. I hope you learned a little bit about the intricacies of the game, as I did when I was looking at these cards. Turns out there's a lot more than meets the eye when it comes to evaluating cards, and when the time comes to review cards from the expansion, I will be taking a very close look at their stats and mana cost versus whatever effect they might have, because all those things come together and they decide just how good a card is. And this isn't something that you'll see in any other game, because it's not just straight mana cost, because it turns out in Spellweaver there are several ways to be a 4-drop, and this way is the best. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.